The dust-caked trail seemed to stretch beyond the horizon, a cruel mirage in the merciless Arizona summer of 1873. Sophia Zimmerman's cracked lips bled as she stumbled forward, her once fine dress now tattered, her spirit as barren as the desert surrounding Fort Bowie. 3 days without water, 5 since the stagecoach attack that had left her the sole survivor, and the grief of losing everything still raw in her soul. When her knees finally buckled beneath her, she didn't fight the fall, welcoming the burning sand against her cheek as her eyelids fluttered, too exhausted even for tears. The rhythmic pounding of approaching hoofbeats barely registered in her fading consciousness. She felt rather than saw the shadow fall across her face, blocking the punishing sun. Strong arms lifted her gently, and she found herself looking into concerned hazel eyes beneath the brim of a weathered Stetson. "Easy now, miss," the deep voice rumbled, as calloused hands supported her head. Through cracked lips, she managed a pitiful moan, unable to form words. The stranger reached for his canteen, and Sophia felt the miraculous touch of cool metal against her parched lips. Water, precious water, trickled into her mouth, and she gulped desperately until he pulled it away. "Slow," he cautioned. "Too much at once will make you sick." As her vision cleared, Sophia saw nothing but kindness in the sun-weathered face of the cowboy who held her. She also saw understanding in eyes that had witnessed their share of suffering. Her own eyes, she knew, held nothing hollow, empty, devoid of the will to continue. The cowboy seemed to read her thoughts. He tilted his head slightly, studying her face with unexpected gentleness for a man so clearly hardened by the frontier. "Tomorrow will be better," he said simply, offering her the canteen again. It wasn't until much later that she learned his name, Clayton Walker. Clayton had been tracking a small band of Apache renegades when he'd spotted her collapsed form on the trail to Fort Bowie. The Apache had been raiding isolated homesteads, and he'd been hired by the cavalry to scout their movements. He'd never expected to find a half-dead woman in the desert. Sophia drifted in and out of consciousness as Clayton's horse carried them both across the barren landscape. Her head rested against his chest, his steady heartbeat a comforting rhythm that anchored her to the world of the living. Each time she woke, he offered her small sips of water and soft words of encouragement. "Fort's just beyond that ridge," he told her as the sun began to set. "Got a doctor there. He'll fix you right up." She wanted to thank him, to ask his name, to explain how she'd come to be dying alone in the desert, but her throat felt scraped raw, and exhaustion pulled her back into darkness before she could form the words. When she next opened her eyes, Sophia found herself in a small, spare room with whitewashed walls. The bed beneath her was firm but comfortable, the sheets clean and crisp against her skin. A woman with gray hair pulled into a severe bun was bathing her face with a cool cloth. "There you are," the woman said, her voice brisk but not unkind. "Was beginning to wonder if you'd ever wake up. I'm Mrs. Holbrook, the doctor's wife." Sophia tried to speak, but only a rasp emerged. Mrs. Holbrook helped her sip water from a tin cup, then gently pushed her back against the pillows. "The cowboy who brought you in said you were alone on the trail. Clayton Walker's his name, good man, for all his rough ways. Been scouting for the army since the war." Mrs. Holbrook fussed with the blankets. "You've been asleep nearly 2 days. Dehydration, heatstroke, and exhaustion, my husband says. You're lucky to be alive. The stagecoach," Sophia finally managed to whisper, "attacked everyone. Gone." Mrs. Holbrook's face softened with sympathy. "I heard. Mr. Walker reported it to the fort commander. They sent soldiers out, found the stage, buried the dead proper." She hesitated. "Was anyone there family to you?" Sophia shook her head slightly. "No, just fellow travelers." The memory of gunshots and screams threatened to overwhelm her, and she closed her eyes against the onslaught. "Rest now," Mrs. Holbrook said, patting her hand. "You're safe at Fort Bowie. Safe, perhaps, but utterly alone." Sophia had left Philadelphia with dreams of teaching at the new schoolhouse in Tucson, where her childhood friend Eliza had settled with her husband. Now those dreams lay shattered alongside the broken stagecoach. For 3 more days, Sophia drifted in and out of sleep in the doctor's spare room. Dr. Holbrook checked on her regularly, his manner efficient but compassionate. "Mrs. Holbrook brought broth and bread, coaxing her to eat small portions. Neither mentioned the cowboy again, and Sophia began to wonder if she'd ever have the chance to properly thank the man who had saved her life. On the fourth morning, Sophia felt strong enough to sit up and even walk a few steps around the room. Mrs. Holbrook brought her a simple calico dress to replace the ruined garments she'd been wearing. "It's not fancy," the older woman apologized, "but it's clean and should fit well enough." "It's perfect," Sophia assured her, running her fingers over the simple blue fabric. "You've been so kind, Mrs. Holbrook. I have nothing to repay you with. My trunk was on the stagecoach, everything I owned." "Nonsense. We're Christians, not shopkeepers," Mrs. Holbrook said firmly. "The fort commander's wife is organizing a collection. The ladies here will make sure you have what you need until you decide what's next." What's next? The words echoed hollowly in Sophia's mind. Without money or possessions, how could she continue to Tucson? And even if she managed to reach her destination, what awaited her there but the charity of friends who had their own struggles on the frontier? Later that afternoon, a knock at the door interrupted Sophia's troubled thoughts. Mrs. Holbrook answered, and a deep voice rumbled a greeting that sent a jolt of recognition through Sophia. Clayton Walker stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking somehow both formidable and uncomfortable in the domestic setting. His dark hair was damp and combed back, his face freshly shaved, though he still wore the practical clothes of a man who lived in the saddle-worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and scuffed leather boots. "Miss Zimmerman's feeling much improved today," Mrs. Holbrook announced. "I'll leave you two to talk." Before Sophia could protest, the older woman had bustled from the room, closing the door partway behind her. "Madam," Clayton nodded, still hovering near the doorway. "Glad to see you're recovering, Mr. Walker," Sophia said, feeling strangely breathless. "Please come in. I've been hoping for the chance to thank you properly for saving my life." He took a few steps into the room but remained standing, his hat clutched awkwardly in his hands. "No need for thanks. Couldn't leave you out there. Nevertheless, I am grateful." Sophia gestured to the room's only chair. "Please sit, unless you're in a hurry." Clayton hesitated, then sat, placing his hat on his knee. "No hurry, just finished reporting to the fort commander. Thought I'd check on you before heading back out. You're leaving Fort Bowie?" Sophia asked, surprised by the twinge of disappointment she felt, just for a few days, still tracking those Apaches. He studied her face. "You look better, got some color back. Doctor and Mrs. Holbrook have been very kind," Sophia said. "As have you, Mr. Walker." "Clayton," he corrected. "Mr. Walker was my father." Sophia smiled, the first genuine smile since the attack. "Then I'm Sophia, not Miss or Madam." Something in Clayton's expression softened. "Sophia, pretty name." A moment of silence stretched between them, not entirely uncomfortable. Sophia found herself studying the man who had carried her from certain death. In the harsh light of the desert, she'd registered only his strength and kindness. Now she noticed the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun, the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the way his hands, though calloused and weathered, moved with a certain grace. "Mrs. Holbrook mentioned you've been scouting for the army," Sophia finally said. "Have you been at Fort Bowie long?" "On and off for 5 years, Clayton replied. "Go where they need me, know this territory better than most." And before that, a shadow crossed his face. "Fought for the Union. After that, tried ranching in Colorado. Didn't take." He shifted in his seat. "What brings you to Arizona territory? Not many women travel alone out here." Sophia explained about her teaching position in Tucson, her friend Eliza, the plans that now seemed impossible. Clayton listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he asked, "What will you do now?" "I don't know," Sophia admitted, the hopelessness she'd been fighting threatening to resurface. "I lost everything in the attack, my clothes, my books, the small savings I had, all gone." Clayton was quiet for a moment, then said, "Fort's always looking for someone to teach the officers' children. Not a proper school, but might tide you over until you can get to Tucson." Hope flickered dimly in Sophia's chest. "Do you really think they would consider me? Worth asking." Commander's wife, Mrs. Fletcher, mentioned needing a governess just last week. Clayton stood, settling his hat back on his head. "I'll speak to her before I leave if you'd like." "I would be most grateful," Sophia said. Thank you, Clayton, he nodded, his expression unreadable. Rest up. I'll be back in a few days. After he left, Sophia sat quietly, contemplating this unexpected possibility. Teaching at the fort wouldn't fulfill her dream of having her own schoolhouse, but it would provide purpose and perhaps the means to eventually continue to Tucson. For the first time since the attack, she allowed herself to believe that tomorrow might indeed be better. True to his word, Clayton spoke to Mrs. Fletcher before departing Fort Bowie. The next morning, the commander's wife herself visited Sophia, a stately woman with kind eyes and a practical manner. "Mr. Walker speaks highly of your qualifications," Mrs. Fletcher said after introductions. "We have 8 children at the fort between the ages of 5 and 12 who desperately need education. The last teacher left 6 months ago, and I've been attempting to instruct them myself. But my duties, as the commander's wife, leave little time for proper lessons." "I would be honored to teach them," Sophia said earnestly. "I've brought no references with me, but I can assure you I'm well qualified. I graduated from the normal school in Philadelphia and taught for 2 years before deciding to come west." Mrs. Fletcher nodded approvingly. "That's more than adequate. The position includes room and board in the officers' quarters plus a small stipend. When can you begin?" "As soon as Dr. Holbrook feels I'm recovered enough," Sophia replied, hardly able to believe her good fortune. "Excellent, I'll have quarters prepared for you." Mrs. Fletcher rose to leave, then paused. "Mr. Walker is not a man who impresses easily, Miss Zimmerman, yet he spoke of your courage with genuine admiration. I look forward to knowing you better." The unexpected comment left Sophia momentarily speechless. She had shown no courage, only the desperate will to survive. That Clayton would view her actions as admirable seemed bewildering. Dr. Holbrook pronounced Sophia well enough to begin light duties 3 days later. She moved into a small but comfortable room in the officers' quarters and met her students, 5 boys and 3 girls from the families stationed at Fort Bowie. The children were bright and eager, having been without formal education for months. The fort's library, though limited, provided basic texts, and Sophia found herself enjoying the challenge of teaching different age groups simultaneously. She established a routine quickly, holding classes in a corner of the mess hall each morning and providing additional instruction to the older children in the afternoons. A week passed with no sign of Clayton Walker. Sophia found herself watching the gate whenever she crossed the parade ground, hoping for a glimpse of the tall scout. She told herself her interest was merely the natural concern for someone facing danger, combined with the desire to thank him for securing her position. Yet in quiet moments, she acknowledged that her thoughts strayed to him more often than they should. 10 days after Clayton's departure, the fort buzzed with activity as a patrol returned, bringing wounded men and grim news. The Apache band they'd been tracking had ambushed them in a narrow canyon. 3 soldiers were dead and several others injured. Sophia heard nothing about Clayton and feared the worst. That evening, as she was helping in the infirmary, changing bandages and offering water to the wounded men, the door swung open to admit 2 figures. One was a young soldier, his arm in a makeshift sling. Supporting him was Clayton Walker, his own face streaked with dirt and what appeared to be dried blood. Relief flooded through Sophia, so intense that for a moment she couldn't move. Then practicality reasserted itself and she hurried forward. "This way," she directed, helping Clayton guide the wounded soldier to an empty cot. "Dr. Holbrook is attending the sergeant, but he'll be here shortly." Clayton nodded, easing the young man down. "Bullet just grazed him, but he's lost blood." His voice sounded hoarse, as if from disuse or shouting. "Sit down before you fall down, Mr. Walker," Sophia ordered, noticing how he swayed slightly on his feet. "You don't look much better than your friend here." A ghost of a smile crossed Clayton's face. "Yes, madam." He sank onto a nearby stool while Sophia examined the young soldier's wound. She was cleaning it with carbolic solution when Clayton spoke again. "Heard you're teaching the fort children." "Yes," she replied, not looking up from her task. "Thanks to you. They're lucky to have you." There was something in his tone that made her glance at him. His eyes, despite the exhaustion evident in the rest of his face, held a warmth that caught her by surprise. "Are you hurt?" she asked, suddenly noticing the tear in his shirt near his ribs. The fabric darkened with what could only be blood. Clayton shook his head. Just a scrape, had worse shaving. Let me see, Sophia insisted, moving toward him after covering the soldier's wound with a clean bandage. It's nothing, Clayton began, but Sophia was already pulling aside the torn fabric. A long gash ran along his ribs, not deep but still oozing blood. This needs cleaning at the very least, she said firmly. Take off your shirt. Clayton raised an eyebrow at her authoritative tone, but complied, wincing slightly as he pulled the fabric away from the wound. Sophia tried not to notice the lean strength of his torso, the map of old scars that told stories of a dangerous life, focusing instead on the task at hand. You're fortunate, she said, gently cleaning the gash with carbolic. An inch deeper and you might have been in real trouble. Told you it was just a scrape. Despite his dismissive words, Clayton sat perfectly still under her ministrations, his breathing controlled and even. How did it happen? Sophia asked, partly to distract him from any pain her cleaning might cause. Apache brave with a knife, got closer than I would have liked. Clayton's voice remained casual, as if discussing the weather rather than a life-threatening encounter. You tracked them then, Sophia applied a salve doctor. Holbrook had taught her to use for preventing infection, found their camp, tried to observe without being seen. A grimace that might have been a smile crossed Clayton's face. Wasn't quite successful. Sophia frowned as she began wrapping a bandage around his torso, her arms reaching around him in an embrace that wasn't an embrace. Yet you're here, and apparently several of them are not. War is ugly business, Sophia, Clayton said quietly. No victory in it, just survival. Something in his tone, regret perhaps, or a weariness deeper than physical exhaustion, made Sophia pause, her hands stilling against his skin. Their eyes met, and for a moment, she glimpsed the burden he carried, the weight of lives taken and comrades lost. I'm glad you survived, she said simply, completing the bandage with gentle efficiency. So am I, he replied, holding her gaze a moment longer before reaching for his torn shirt. Wait, Sophia said, let me find you something clean to wear. That shirt needs mending and the blood will stiffen the fabric. Before Clayton could protest, she had slipped away, returning moments later with a simple cotton shirt. One of the lieutenants left this behind when he was transferred last month, she explained. Mrs. Fletcher keeps a supply of extra clothing for emergencies. Clayton accepted it with a nod of thanks. As he pulled it over his head, Dr. Holbrook appeared, looking harried but composed. Walker, the doctor acknowledged, heard you brought in Private Jenkins. Good work. His experienced eye took in the bandage visible beneath the clean shirt. I see Miss Zimmerman has already tended to you. She has, Clayton confirmed, standing. Seems she's as skilled with bandages as she is with teaching. Indeed, Philadelphia education shows in everything she does, Doctor. Holbrook said approvingly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to examine the private properly. Sophia walked with Clayton to the infirmary door. Outside, the fort had settled into evening quiet, the flag lowered for the night, lanterns glowing in windows. Stars pricked the vast Arizona sky, brilliant in their multitude. Will you be staying at the fort now? Sophia asked, trying to sound merely conversational. For a few days. Need to make a full report to the commander. Clayton looked down at her, his expression softening. You seem to be settling in well here. Yes, thanks to your recommendation. The children are eager to learn and everyone has been kind. Sophia hesitated, then added, but I still plan to continue to Tucson eventually. I made a promise to my friend Eliza and I intend to keep it. Clayton nodded, his face unreadable in the gathering dusk. Tucson's growing fast. They'll need good teachers. A silence fell between them, filled with words unsaid. Sophia found herself wishing he would ask her to stay at Fort Bowie, even as she chided herself for such foolishness. Clayton Walker was a frontiersman, a scout who disappeared for days or weeks at a time. She was a schoolteacher seeking stability and purpose. Their paths had crossed by chance, nothing more. You should rest, she finally said. That scrape needs time to heal properly. Yes, madam, Clayton replied, the ghost of a smile playing at his lips. Good night, Sophia. Good night, Clayton. As he walked away toward the bachelor officers' quarters where scouts and guides were typically housed, Sophia remained by the infirmary door, watching until his tall figure disappeared into the shadows. Only then did she acknowledge the quickening of her heart when she'd first seen him enter the infirmary, the relief that had flooded through her at finding him alive. Foolish, she told herself firmly. You barely know the man, yet as she returned to help Dr. Holbrook with the wounded soldiers, Sophia knew that Clayton Walker had somehow become important to her, against all reason and propriety. The next few days established a new routine at Fort Bowie. Sophia continued teaching the children each morning, then spent afternoons helping in the infirmary or assisting Mrs. Fletcher with correspondence. The commander's wife had taken Sophia under her wing, introducing her to the other officers' wives and including her in their social gatherings. Clayton remained at the fort, meeting daily with Commander Fletcher and the cavalry officers to plan their strategy against the Apache renegades. Sophia saw him occasionally across the parade ground or in the mess hall, but their interactions were limited to polite nods and brief greetings. He seemed to be deliberately keeping his distance, and Sophia told herself it was for the best. 5 days after Clayton's return, a supply wagon arrived from Tucson, bringing mail and provisions. Among the letters was one addressed to Sophia, forwarded from the postmaster in Tucson. She recognized Eliza's handwriting immediately and tore open the envelope with trembling fingers. The letter began warmly enough, with Eliza expressing her joy that Sophia was finally coming west. But as Sophia continued reading, her heart sank. Eliza's husband had received orders transferring him to Fort Laramie in Wyoming Territory. They would be leaving Tucson within the month, long before Sophia could hope to join them. "I'm so sorry, dear friend," Eliza wrote. "I know how much you were counting on our support while you established yourself here. Please don't think of attempting the journey now Tucson is growing, but it's still a rough place for a woman alone. Perhaps you could find a position in the East until we're settled in Wyoming. I'll write as soon as we have a permanent address." Sophia folded the letter carefully, fighting the despair that threatened to overwhelm her. Her carefully laid plans, already damaged by the stagecoach attack, now lay in complete ruins. Without Eliza's support, the prospect of establishing herself in Tucson seemed impossible. That evening, Sophia skipped dinner in the mess hall, preferring solitude as she contemplated her limited options. She sat on the small porch outside her quarters, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. "Bad news," the quiet voice startled her. Clayton stood a few feet away, his tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. He must have approached silently while she was lost in thought. "How did you know?" Sophia asked, not bothering to deny it. "Saw your face when you read that letter earlier." Clayton moved closer, leaning against the porch railing. "Figured it wasn't good tidings." Sophia sighed, too weary for pretense. "My friend in Tucson, the one I was traveling to join, is leaving for Wyoming. Her husband has been transferred." Clayton was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. "Changes your plans." "Destroys them completely," Sophia corrected, a bitter edge to her voice that surprised even her. "I have no connections in Tucson now, no guaranteed position, no place to stay while I look for work." "You have a position here," Clayton pointed out. "Kids are learning." "Fletcher says his boy never showed interest in books before you came." "It's temporary," Sophia said. "We both know that. When the next proper teacher arrives or when officers' families are transferred, I'll be unnecessary." Clayton studied her face in the fading light. "You're scared." The simple observation, stated without judgment, broke through Sophia's carefully maintained composure. "Of course I'm scared," she admitted, her voice cracking slightly. "I'm alone in a territory I barely know, with no family, dwindling options, and not even the possessions I started with." What woman wouldn't be frightened? Instead of offering empty reassurances, Clayton simply nodded. "Fear's natural, shows good sense." He straightened from his casual lean. "Take a walk with me." The unexpected invitation caught Sophia off guard. "Now it's getting dark. Best time to see the desert. Moon's nearly full tonight." He extended his hand. "Won't go far from the fort." Something in his steady gaze made Sophia trust him. She placed her hand in his calloused palm and allowed him to help her up. They walked in companionable silence beyond the fort's buildings to a small rise overlooking the valley. True to Clayton's word, the full moon was rising, bathing the landscape in silvery light that transformed the harsh desert into something otherworldly and beautiful. The distant mountains stood like sentinels against the star-filled sky, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and earth. "It's beautiful," Sophia breathed, momentarily forgetting her troubles in the face of such vast tranquility. "First saw this view 6 years ago," Clayton said quietly. "Just back from the war, angry at everything and everyone. Couldn't sleep, so I walked out here one night." He gazed across the moonlit landscape. "Something about it settled me, reminded me the world's bigger than my troubles." Sophia glanced at him, surprised by this glimpse into his inner thoughts. "Does it still help when things are difficult?" Clayton nodded slowly. "Some nights more than others. Figured it might help you too." The simple kindness of his gesture touched Sophia deeply. "Thank you for sharing it with me." They stood in silence for several minutes, the gentle breeze playing with Sophia's hair. When Clayton spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "Got word today. Army's sending me to escort a government agent to the Apache reservation at San Carlos, leaving tomorrow." Disappointment pierced Sophia's momentary peace. "How long will you be gone?" 3 weeks, maybe longer." Clayton turned to face her directly. "Been thinking. Land office in Tucson is offering homestead claims southeast of here. Good water, decent grazing. I've had my eye on a parcel for a while now." Sophia tried to follow this apparent change of subject. "You're thinking of settling down, maybe. Scouting's a young man's game." Clayton's gaze was steady. "When I get back from San Carlos, I'm heading to Tucson to file my claim. Could inquire about teaching positions while I'm there, for you." The offer stunned Sophia. "That's extraordinarily kind, but I couldn't impose no imposition," Clayton cut in. "Going anyway. Might take a couple months to find something suitable, but at least you'd know what's available before deciding." "Why would you do this for me?" Sophia asked, genuinely puzzled by his continued assistance. Clayton was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "Maybe I like seeing hope in your eyes instead of despair," he finally said, his voice low. "Or maybe I just think Arizona territory needs good teachers more than it needs another scout with a gun." Before Sophia could formulate a response, he continued, "You don't have to decide now. Think about it while I'm gone. If you want me to ask around in Tucson, let me know when I get back." The moonlight softened his weathered features, revealing a gentleness Sophia suspected few people ever saw. In that moment, she realized with startling clarity that her interest in Clayton Walker had grown beyond gratitude or casual friendship. The thought of his 3-week absence left an unexpected ache. "I'll think about it," she promised, her voice softer than she intended. Clayton nodded, seeming satisfied. "Should head back, getting late." They walked back to the fort in silence, the connection between them somehow altered, deepened by their conversation under the vast Arizona sky. At the door to her quarters, Clayton paused. "I'll be leaving before dawn," he said. "Wanted to say goodbye properly." "Safe journey, Clayton," Sophia replied, suddenly finding it difficult to meet his eyes. "Thank you for everything." He studied her face for a moment, then reached out slowly, as if giving her time to step away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gentle touch sent a shiver through Sophia that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. "You're going to be fine, Sophia Zimmerman," Clayton said quietly. "Whether in Tucson or here or somewhere else entirely, you're stronger than you know." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat slightly and turned away, his long strides carrying him quickly across the darkened parade ground. Sophia watched until he disappeared, her heart beating a strange, unfamiliar rhythm. The weeks of Clayton's absence passed slowly. Sophia threw herself into teaching with renewed dedication, expanding her lessons to include evening classes for soldiers who wished to improve their reading and writing skills. The activity kept her mind occupied during the day, but at night, her thoughts inevitably turned to Clayton, wondering where he was, if he was safe, what dangers he might be facing. She found herself seeking out people who knew him, casually steering conversations toward the scout and his background. From Dr. Holbrook, she learned that Clayton had come to Arizona after a brief, failed attempt at ranching in Colorado. The doctor mentioned that Clayton rarely spoke of his time during the war, but had once admitted to serving with the 1st Colorado Cavalry. Mrs. Fletcher provided additional insights, revealing that Clayton had been married briefly before the war to his childhood sweetheart in Missouri. The young woman had died of typhoid while Clayton was fighting, a tragedy he discovered only upon returning home in 1865. He never speaks of it, Mrs. Fletcher told Sophia as they sorted supplies for the school. I only know because my husband served with an officer who knew Clayton's family. I believe that loss is partly why he's chosen such a solitary life since. The information helped Sophia understand Clayton's reserved nature and his apparent reluctance to form close attachments. It also made his kindness toward her seem all the more significant. 24 days after Clayton's departure, a rider arrived at Fort Bowie with news that the government agent's business at San Carlos had concluded, and Clayton would be returning with him within 2 days. Sophia tried to ignore the surge of anticipation the announcement triggered, telling herself her interest was merely friendly concern. 2 days stretched into 4, then a week, with no sign of Clayton or the government agent. Commander Fletcher began to show concern, dispatching a small patrol to search the trail between the fort and the reservation. They returned with no news. 10 days after Clayton was expected back, Sophia was teaching her students when a commotion at the fort gates drew everyone's attention. She dismissed the children and hurried outside to see several riders entering the fort. In the lead was a man she didn't recognize, presumably the government agent. Behind him rode 2 soldiers from the patrol and Clayton. Relief flooded through Sophia at the sight of him, apparently unharmed, sitting tall in his saddle. Then she noticed the grim set of his mouth, the tension in his shoulders. Something had happened during their journey. She remained by the schoolhouse as the men dismounted and were greeted by Commander Fletcher. Clayton glanced in her direction, acknowledging her presence with a brief nod before following the others into the commander's office. It was hours before Sophia saw him again. Evening had fallen, and she was sitting on her small porch, reading by lantern light when footsteps approached. She looked up to see Clayton standing at the bottom of the steps, his hat in his hands. "You're back," she said, unable to keep the relief from her voice. "We were worried." "Had some trouble on the trail," Clayton replied, his voice rougher than she remembered. "Apache warriors who aren't accepting reservation life forced us to take a longer route." "Are you all right?" Sophia asked, studying his face in the lantern light. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a new hardness to his expression. "Fine." He climbed the steps slowly, as if his body ached. "May I sit?" "Of course." Sophia moved over on the small bench, setting her book aside. Clayton lowered himself beside her with a barely suppressed groan. For several minutes he said nothing, simply staring out at the darkened parade ground. Sophia waited, sensing he needed the silence. "Lost one of the soldiers," he finally said, his voice flat. "Young kid, no more than 20. First posting out west." Clayton's hands tightened around his hat. "Should have anticipated the ambush. Terrain was perfect for it." "I'm sorry," Sophia said softly, understanding now the shadow in his eyes. "Wrote a letter to his mother." Clayton continued staring straight ahead. "Tried to tell her he died quickly, didn't suffer. Truth is, took him hours to go. Nothing we could do but watch and wait." Without thinking, Sophia reached out and covered his hand with hers. Clayton's fingers were cold despite the warm evening, and they twitched slightly at her touch before relaxing. "You brought the others home safely," she said. "That matters too." Clayton turned to look at her, something vulnerable and questioning in his gaze. "Does it balance out, I mean?" Sophia considered her answer carefully, knowing platitudes would ring hollow to this man who had seen so much death. "I don't think it works that way," she finally said. "Each life stands alone in its value. You can't trade one for another in some cosmic ledger." "But you honored that young man by bringing his companions safely home, by writing to his mother, by remembering him." Clayton was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. "Thought about what I said before I left." The abrupt change of subject momentarily confused Sophia, until she realized he was asking about his offer to inquire about teaching positions in Tucson. "Yes," she said. "I'd be grateful if you would make inquiries, but only if you're still planning to go for your own reasons. I wouldn't want to be the cause of an unnecessary journey." "Still going," Clayton confirmed. "Filing my claim is long overdue." He hesitated, then added, "Leaving day after tomorrow if you want to send any letters with me." "So soon?" Sophia couldn't hide her surprise. "You've only just returned." A ghost of a smile crossed Clayton's face. "Eager to be rid of me already?" "No, not at all," Sophia replied quickly, feeling her cheeks warm at his teasing tone. "I just thought you might rest longer before another journey." "Better to keep moving," Clayton said, his momentary lightness fading. "Too much time to think otherwise." Sophia understood then that Clayton used constant movement as a shield against his own thoughts, his own memories. The realization saddened her, even as it deepened her understanding of the complex man beside her. "I'll write a letter to the school board in Tucson," she promised. "And perhaps one to the newspaper editor asking about any positions he might know of." Clayton nodded, satisfied. "I'll deliver them personally." He stood, settling his hat back on his head. "Should let you get back to your reading." "Clayton," Sophia said impulsively as he turned to leave, "when you return from Tucson, would you tell me about your homestead claim, what the land is like, what you plan to do with it?" He looked back at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Why?" Sophia wasn't entirely sure herself why she'd asked, only that she wanted a reason to see him again, to continue whatever tentative connection was forming between them. "Because I've never seen a homestead," she replied, "and because it sounds like something that makes you happy." Clayton studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "All right, when I get back." He touched the brim of his hat. "Good night, Sophia." "Good night, Clayton." As she watched him walk away, Sophia acknowledged to herself what she'd been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Clayton Walker. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. He was unlike any man she'd known before, hardened by life, yet capable of profound kindness, solitary yet perceptive of others' needs, scarred but not broken. Whether he could ever return her feelings remained a mystery as vast as the Arizona desert itself. Clayton departed for Tucson as planned, carrying Sophia's carefully worded letters of inquiry. The fort seemed emptier without his presence, though Sophia kept busy with her teaching duties and continued to help in the infirmary when needed. 2 weeks passed with no word, then 3. Sophia tried not to worry, reminding herself that the journey to Tucson and back, plus time to conduct business there, would naturally take several weeks. Nearly a month after Clayton's departure, a supply wagon arrived from Tucson. The wagon master delivered a package to Sophia, a small wooden crate containing books for her students, some personal items she had requested, and a letter. Her heart jumped when she recognized Clayton's bold, slightly awkward handwriting on the envelope. She waited until evening to open it, wanting privacy for whatever news it contained. Sitting on her porch in the fading light, she carefully broke the seal. The letter was surprisingly long for a man she suspected rarely put pen to paper. Clayton wrote that he had successfully filed his homestead claim on a promising piece of land southeast of Fort Bowie, near enough to a small settlement called Paradise Valley that supplies would be accessible but far enough away to ensure privacy and good grazing for cattle. Regarding her teaching inquiries, the news was mixed. The school board in Tucson already had a teacher, but suggested they might need another by the following spring as the town continued to grow. The newspaper editor knew of no immediate openings, but had promised to keep her letter on file. However, Clayton had discovered that the small settlement near his homestead claim desperately needed a teacher for the dozen or so children there. "The families have pooled resources to offer a modest salary," Clayton wrote. "They can provide a small cabin and basic supplies. It's a rough place compared to Philadelphia or even Fort Bowie, but the people are honest and hardworking. If you're interested, I can introduce you when I return." The letter concluded with practical information about when Clayton expected to finish his business in Tucson and start the journey back to Fort Bowie. He estimated his return within 2 weeks of the letter's arrival. Sophia read the letter twice, her mind racing with possibilities. Paradise Valley was completely unknown to her, likely even smaller and more isolated than Fort Bowie. Yet the prospect of having her own school, however humble, was appealing, and the proximity to Clayton's homestead claim was significant, though she hesitated to examine exactly why that mattered so much. 2 weeks later, Sophia stood at Fort Bowie's gate, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun as she watched a lone rider approach from the south. She recognized Clayton's straight-backed posture and the distinctive gait of his horse long before she could make out his features. He spotted her waiting and raised a hand in greeting, spurring his horse to a slightly faster pace. When he reached the gate, he dismounted with fluid grace, looking less trail-worn than Sophia had expected after such a long journey. "Welcome back," she said, suddenly shy now that he stood before her. "Good to be back," Clayton replied, his eyes warming as they took in her face. "Got my letter?" "Yes, thank you." Sophia fell into step beside him as he led his horse toward the stables. "It sounds like Paradise Valley might be a possibility, though I know very little about it. Small place, growing slowly. Mostly ranchers and a few farmers where the land permits." Clayton glanced at her. "Interested in hearing more?" "Very much so," Sophia confirmed. "When you've had a chance to rest, of course." A ghost of a smile touched Clayton's lips. "How about dinner? Mess hall food might not be fancy, but after weeks of my own cooking, it'll taste like a feast." "I'd like that," Sophia said, pleased by the invitation. That evening, over a simple meal of beef stew and biscuits, Clayton described Paradise Valley in detail, the scattered ranches surrounding a tiny settlement consisting of a general store, a small church, a saloon, and a handful of houses. The proposed school would be a converted barn until proper facilities could be built, but the families were committed to education for their children. "It's honest work," Clayton said, breaking a biscuit in half. "Hard sometimes, especially in winter, but rewarding in its way. These are frontier families building something from nothing. They value learning more than you might expect." "And your homestead, how far is it from the settlement?" Sophia asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than revealing how much the answer mattered. "About 5 miles, Clayton replied. "Close enough to reach easily, far enough for privacy." He hesitated, then added, "Land has a good creek running through it, plenty of grass for cattle. Previous owner built a small cabin before giving up and heading back east. Needs work, but it's solid." The way he described it, with quiet pride and careful attention to detail, told Sophia how much the land meant to him. She could imagine him there, building something permanent after years of constant movement. "It sounds wonderful," she said sincerely. "When will you start working it?" "Already have, in small ways. Left some supplies there before coming to Tucson." Clayton met her eyes. "Plan to split my time between scouting and the homestead for now. Army still needs guides, and the extra money will help get the ranch established." "A sensible approach," Sophia nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment she felt at the thought of his continued absences from Fort Bowie or Paradise Valley if she accepted the teaching position. Clayton studied her face. "Would you like to see it? The valley, I mean, and the settlement?" Sophia's heart quickened at the unexpected suggestion. "Is that possible?" "Could arrange a small escort from the fort," Clayton said. 2-day ride each way, give you a better idea of what you'd be committing to if you take the position." "Yes," Sophia said without hesitation. "I'd like to see it very much." Clayton smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face and reached his eyes. "I'll speak to Commander Fletcher tomorrow. If he approves, we could leave within the week." The commander not only approved the journey, but insisted on sending 4 soldiers as escort. Sophia spent the days before departure gathering information about Paradise Valley from anyone who had visited the settlement and preparing lessons for her students at the fort to use in her absence. Mrs. Fletcher helped her pack appropriate clothing for the journey, including a split riding skirt that would allow her to ride astride rather than side saddle for the long trip. The morning of their departure dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for traveling. Sophia met Clayton and their escort at the stables, where a gentle mare had been saddled for her use. Despite having ridden occasionally at Fort Bowie, Sophia felt a flutter of nervousness at the prospect of spending 2 full days in the saddle. Clayton seemed to read her thoughts. "We'll take it easy," he assured her, adjusting her mare's stirrups. "Stop often to rest, no need to push hard." The journey proved less arduous than Sophia had feared. Clayton set a comfortable pace, and the escort soldiers maintained a respectful distance, giving them privacy while ensuring their safety. They traveled through stunning landscapes of mountains and valleys, with Clayton pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the territory's history. By late afternoon of the second day, they crested a hill to reveal a verdant valley spread below them, with scattered buildings visible in the distance and the silver thread of a creek winding through the center. "Paradise Valley," Clayton announced, reining his horse to a stop. "Not much to look at compared to Philadelphia, I expect." But Sophia found it beautiful in its wild, untamed way. The valley was framed by distant mountains, with scattered oak and pine trees providing patches of shade among the grassland. Cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, and several thin columns of smoke rose from homestead chimneys. "It's lovely," she said honestly, "so open and free." They rode down into the valley as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Clayton led them not to the small cluster of buildings that constituted the settlement, but toward a modest cabin set back against a rise of land, with a small corral and barn nearby. A creek flowed past not 50 yards from the cabin door. "Your homestead?" Sophia asked, surprised. Clayton nodded. "Thought we'd stop here for the night. More comfortable than camping, and the settlement's small store won't have proper accommodations for a lady." He dismounted and helped Sophia down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The soldiers busied themselves making camp near the creek, while Clayton led Sophia toward the cabin. "It's not much," he said, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice as he pushed open the door. "Still needs work." The cabin was indeed simple one main room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and a small alcove that presumably served as a sleeping area. Yet Sophia saw the care that had gone into its construction and recent improvements. The floor was swept clean, the fireplace recently used, and new shelves had been built along one wall. "You've been working on it," she observed, noticing fresh cut wood and a half-finished chair in one corner. "When I can," Clayton confirmed, moving to light a lamp as dusk gathered outside. "Added the shelves last time I was here. Thought a man ought to have a place for books, even if he doesn't own many yet." The simple statement revealed more about Clayton's aspirations than perhaps he realized. Sophia could see him envisioning a future here, creating not just a place to sleep between journeys but a home. "It's wonderful," she said warmly. "You've chosen a beautiful spot." Clayton looked pleased by her approval. "Creek never runs dry, even in summer, good for cattle and crops both." He gestured toward the alcove. "You can take the bed tonight, I'll sleep by the fire." Sophia started to protest, but Clayton was already heading back outside to help the soldiers with the horses. Left alone, she explored the cabin more thoroughly, noting the small touches that spoke of Clayton's character: a carefully whittled wooden horse on the mantel, a well-worn Bible on the table beside the bed, a map of the territory pinned to one wall with notes in Clayton's handwriting. That evening, they shared a simple meal with the soldiers around a campfire outside the cabin. As darkness fell and the stars emerged in brilliant profusion, Sophia found herself more content than she had been in months. There was something freeing about being so far from civilization, surrounded by the vast, indifferent beauty of the frontier. The soldiers eventually retreated to their own camp by the creek, leaving Sophia and Clayton alone by the fire. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance and listening to the night sounds of the desert. "What do you think?" Clayton finally asked, his voice quiet. "Of the valley?" "It's beautiful," Sophia replied honestly. "Wilder than I expected, but beautiful in its own way." Clayton nodded, poking at the fire with a stick. "Settlement's about 5 miles northeast. We'll ride there tomorrow so you can meet some of the families, see the place they're planning to use for the school." "Thank you for bringing me," Sophia said, turning to look at him in the firelight. "Not just to see the settlement, but to see your homestead as well. It means a great deal that you would share it." Something in her tone must have revealed more than she intended, because Clayton's eyes, when they met hers, held a question. For a long moment, neither spoke, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. "Sophia," Clayton finally said, her name almost a sigh. "I'm not good with words, never have been, but I need to say something, and I'd appreciate it if you'd just listen until I'm finished." Heart suddenly pounding, Sophia nodded. "When I found you on that trail months ago, I was just doing what any decent man would do." Clayton's gaze returned to the fire. "Didn't think much beyond getting you to safety, but then, something changed, started looking forward to seeing you at the fort. Found myself thinking about you when I was out scouting, worried about you when I was in Tucson." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "It's been a long time since I cared what happened to anyone besides myself, not since Mary died during the war. Told myself I was better off alone. Safer that way." Sophia held her breath, afraid to hope that his words meant what she thought they might. "Then I met you," Clayton continued, his voice rougher now. "Woman with no reason to hope, who found courage to build a new life anyway, made me think maybe I've been wrong all these years. Maybe there's more to living than just surviving." He turned to face her directly. "I'm not asking for anything, Sophia. You deserve a proper life, not some half-wild scout with more scars than prospects. But I wanted you to know. You've come to mean something to me, more than I expected. More than is probably wise." The raw honesty in his voice moved Sophia deeply. Without allowing herself time to reconsider, she reached out and placed her hand over his. "Clayton," she said softly, "do you remember what you said to me when you found me in the desert?" He looked puzzled. "Said a lot of things, most of them probably foolish. You said, 'Tomorrow will be better.'" Sophia's fingers tightened around his. "I didn't believe you then, couldn't imagine how anything would ever be better again, but you were right. Each tomorrow has been better, largely because of your kindness and support." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "You say I deserve a proper life, but what if the life I want isn't what others would consider proper? What if what I want is a chance to teach children who need learning, to live in a place where I can see the stars every night too? To be near someone who makes me feel safe and valued?" Clayton's eyes widened slightly as her meaning became clear. "Sophia, now I'm asking you to listen," she interrupted gently. "I know we've known each other only a few months. I know there would be challenges your scouting, my teaching, the dangers of frontier life, but I've come to care for you, Clayton, deeply. And if you're willing, I'd like to explore what that might mean for both of us." For a moment, Clayton sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. Then, slowly, he turned his hand beneath hers until their palms met. His fingers curled around hers with careful tenderness. "Never expected this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Never thought someone like you would look twice at someone like me. Perhaps you should reconsider what you deserve as well," Sophia suggested softly. Clayton's free hand came up to touch her cheek, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "If I kiss you now, there's no going back for me," he warned. "Need you to be certain." In answer, Sophia leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss began tentatively, a careful exploration. Then Clayton's arms encircled her, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened into something that made Sophia's heart race and her mind whirl. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Clayton rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since Fort Bowie," he admitted with a small smile. "Maybe longer." Sophia laughed softly, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. "I believe I have too, though I was reluctant to admit it even to myself." They remained by the fire for hours, talking as they never had before. Clayton spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his brief, happy marriage to Mary, the horrors he'd witnessed during the war that had driven him west seeking solitude and purpose. Sophia shared her own history, her parents' early deaths, the aunt who had raised her with stern affection, her determination to make her own way in a world that offered women limited paths. "If I take the teaching position here," Sophia said as the fire burned low, "what happens next?" "For us, I mean," Clayton considered the question seriously. "Would court you properly," he said. "Take time for both of us to be sure. I'll still need to scout for the army occasionally, at least until the ranch is established. You'll have your school. And after that," Sophia pressed gently. Clayton's eyes, reflecting the dying embers, held both caution and hope. "If things go well between us, I'd ask you to marry me, build a life here together." The simple declaration, spoken without embellishment or flowery promises, meant more to Sophia than any elaborate proposal. It was honest, practical, and deeply sincere, like the man himself. "I would like that very much," she said softly. The following morning, they rode to the settlement where Sophia met the families who had organized the teaching position. The school was indeed a converted barn, but the parents had built simple desks and benches and collected what books they could for their children's education. The enthusiasm of both parents and children touched Sophia deeply, confirming her growing certainty that this was where she belonged. By the time they began the journey back to Fort Bowie the next day, Sophia had accepted the position, promising to return within a month to begin teaching. The ride back seemed shorter somehow, filled with conversations about the future, shared observations about the landscape, and quiet moments of simple connection. At Fort Bowie, Commander Fletcher and his wife expressed both congratulations and regret at Sophia's decision to leave. Arrangements were made for another teacher to come from Tucson to replace her at the fort, and the officers' wives organized a small gathering to wish her well in her new position. During the weeks before her departure, Clayton divided his time between helping prepare for Sophia's relocation and making improvements to his homestead. They agreed to proceed carefully with their courtship, maintaining propriety despite their deepening feelings for one another. Sophia's last day at Fort Bowie arrived with surprising swiftness. As she packed her few possessions into the wagon that would carry her to Paradise Valley, memories of her arrival months earlier, dehydrated, desperate, devoid of hope, seemed to belong to another lifetime. Clayton loaded the final crate and secured it with rope. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand to help her onto the wagon seat. Sophia glanced back at Fort Bowie, where she had found safety and purpose when she needed it most. Then she looked at Clayton, whose steady presence had become the center of her new life, and smiled. "Yes," she said, placing her hand in his. "I'm ready." The journey to Paradise Valley took 2 full days, with Clayton driving the wagon and 2 soldiers riding escort. They camped overnight near a small stream, and Sophia found herself oddly comfortable with the rough conditions, so different from her previous life in Philadelphia. Upon arriving at the settlement, Sophia was welcomed warmly by the families she had met during her earlier visit. The small cabin promised for her use had been cleaned and furnished simply, with a bed, table, chairs, and a cooking stove. Several of the women had brought food and supplies to help her settle in. Clayton stayed in the settlement for 2 days, helping Sophia organize her new home and the schoolroom. Their parting was bittersweet, tempered by the knowledge that his homestead was only 5 miles away and he would visit regularly. "I'll come by in a few days," he promised as he prepared to leave. "Sooner if you need anything at all." "I'll be fine," Sophia assured him, though her heart ached at the thought of their separation, brief though it would be. "The Millers have invited me for dinner tomorrow, and I start teaching the day after." Clayton glanced around to ensure they weren't observed, then quickly pulled her into his arms for a brief but fervent kiss. "Never thought I'd find happiness again," he murmured against her hair. "Thank you for proving me wrong." In the months that followed, Sophia built a life in Paradise Valley that exceeded her expectations. Her small school grew from 12 to 17 students as word spread of the quality of education she provided. The families supported her efforts enthusiastically, contributing supplies, volunteer labor for improvements to the school building, and occasional gifts of food or handcrafted items for her cabin. Clayton visited regularly, gradually spending more time at his homestead and less on scouting missions as his ranch began to take shape. He built up a small herd of cattle, repaired and expanded the cabin, and planted a vegetable garden that Sophia helped tend when she visited on weekends. Their courtship progressed with the steady, unhurried pace that characterized Clayton himself. There were shared meals and long rides across the valley, quiet evenings by the fire discussing books or Arizona history, and increasingly frequent moments of physical affection that left them both longing for more but determined to proceed honorably. 8 months after Sophia's arrival in Paradise Valley, Clayton rode into the settlement on a bright spring morning. It was Saturday, no school in session, and Sophia was tending the small flower garden she'd planted beside her cabin. She straightened at the sound of hoofbeats, smiling when she recognized Clayton's tall figure on his familiar bay horse. He dismounted with his usual grace, but seemed uncharacteristically nervous as he approached, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "Good morning," Sophia greeted him, brushing dirt from her hands. "I wasn't expecting you until later. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," Clayton assured her. "Just wanted to come early. Thought we might ride out to the creek if you're not busy." Something in his manner, a certain tension, a careful formality made Sophia's heart beat faster. "I'd like that," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let me change into my riding clothes." They rode in companionable silence, Clayton leading the way to a particularly beautiful spot along the creek where willows dipped their branches into the clear water and wildflowers dotted the grassy bank. It had become one of their favorite places to visit together. Clayton helped Sophia dismount, his hands lingering at her waist slightly longer than necessary. They secured the horses, then walked to a flat rock beside the water that served as a natural bench. "Pretty day," Clayton observed, his voice sounding oddly constrained. "Beautiful," Sophia agreed, watching him from the corner of her eye. His usual calm seemed disrupted by some internal struggle. After a moment of silence, Clayton turned to face her directly. "Sophia, I've never been good with fancy words, prefer plain speaking, even when it matters most." He took her hands in his. "But what I need to say today deserves better than my usual bluntness." Sophia's breath caught as Clayton lowered himself to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "You found me when I wasn't looking to be found," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "Taught me there's more to life than just surviving from one day to the next, showed me what it means to have a future worth building." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "This was my mother's, would be honored if you'd wear it as my wife." Tears blurred Sophia's vision as happiness welled up inside her. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Clayton, I will marry you." Clayton slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose and gathered her into his arms. Their kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. "Thought about waiting longer," Clayton admitted when they finally parted. "Making sure you were certain about this life, about me, but every day with you makes me more certain that this is right." "It is right," Sophia assured him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "More right than anything I've ever known." They were married 4 weeks later in the small church at Paradise Valley, with the entire settlement in attendance. Clayton wore a new suit ordered from Tucson, and Sophia a simple white dress made by the women of the community, Dr. and Mrs. Holbrook traveled from Fort Bowie for the occasion, along with Commander and Mrs. Fletcher. After a celebration that lasted well into the evening, Clayton brought Sophia home to his now their homestead. He carried her across the threshold of the cabin, which he had expanded and improved in secret during the weeks before the wedding. A new bedroom had been added, with large windows that caught the morning sunlight. The main room now boasted floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, still mostly empty but waiting to be filled over the years to come. "Welcome home, Mrs. Walker," Clayton said softly as he set her down. Sophia turned in a slow circle, taking in the loving care evident in every detail. "It's perfect," she whispered, tears threatening again. "Absolutely perfect." Life as a rancher's wife brought challenges Sophia had never anticipated in her previous existence. There were seasons of drought that threatened the cattle, harsh winters that tested their endurance, and occasional threats from rustlers or hostile bands that reminded them of the frontier's dangers. Clayton still took occasional scouting jobs when the ranch income ran low, each departure a small heartbreak for Sophia despite her understanding of its necessity. Yet the joys far outweighed the hardships. Sophia continued teaching at the settlement, watching her students grow and learn with profound satisfaction. The ranch prospered gradually under Clayton's careful management, expanding from a small subsistence operation to a modestly successful enterprise. Their cabin became a true home, filled with books, mementos, and the evidence of a life fully shared. 2 years after their wedding, Sophia gave birth to a son they named William, after Clayton's father. The boy inherited his father's steady nature and his mother's quick mind, growing into a thoughtful child who loved both books and horses with equal passion. 3 years later, a daughter joined their family, Elizabeth, called Beth, with Clayton's hazel eyes and an independent spirit that kept her parents constantly vigilant. Paradise Valley grew slowly but steadily, eventually boasting a proper schoolhouse where Sophia continued to teach, though now only 3 days a week, so she could devote more time to her family and the ranch. Clayton's reputation as a fair businessman and skilled rancher earned him the respect of the community, and he was eventually persuaded to serve as unofficial mayor of the settlement. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Clayton surprised Sophia with a trip to Tucson, their first real vacation since their marriage. As they walked together through the growing city, Sophia reflected on how different her life had become from what she had once envisioned. Any regrets? Clayton asked, seeming to read her thoughts as he so often did. About staying in Paradise Valley instead of coming here, Sophia shook her head, squeezing his hand. Not one, she said truthfully. Everything I need, everything I love is in our valley. They stopped at a small park where their children were playing under the watchful eye of the hotel maid they had hired for the afternoon. William, now 8, was reading to his 5-year-old sister from a book about cowboys, his expression serious as he carefully pronounced each word. They're growing so fast, Sophia murmured, leaning against Clayton's shoulder. Too fast, he agreed, his arms circling her waist. William's already talking about wanting his own horse, not just riding with me. And Beth asked when she could learn to shoot a rifle, Sophia added with a small laugh. Heaven help us when they're teenagers. Clayton smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling in the way she had come to love. At 45, his hair had begun to show threads of silver, and the years of outdoor work had weathered his face further. Yet to Sophia, he was more handsome than ever, his features refined by experience and deepened by joy. Remember when I found you on that trail? Clayton asked, his voice soft with memory. You looked at me like you expected I might vanish, like I wasn't quite real. I was half delirious from thirst, Sophia reminded him, and you appeared like some vision out of nowhere. Told you tomorrow would be better, Clayton recalled. Had no idea how much better it would get for both of us. Sophia turned in his arms, looking up into the face of the man who had saved her in more ways than one. You gave me water when I was dying, she said, but more importantly, you gave me hope when I had none left. Everything else, our home, our children, our life together began with that moment. Clayton lowered his head to kiss her, unhurried and tender. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers in the gesture that had become so familiar over their years together. Best thing I ever did, he murmured, finding you in that desert. Sophia smiled, her heart full of the quiet, enduring love they had built together. Best thing that ever happened to me, she replied, being found. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sophia and Clayton called their children to join them for the walk back to their hotel. With William's small hand in hers and Beth riding on her father's shoulders, Sophia felt the familiar certainty that had become the foundation of her life in Paradise Valley. Tomorrow would indeed be better, as would all the tomorrows they would share in the years to come.